Sometimes the quietest breath in the room is the one that changes everything. August 1963, Gary, Indiana, the Jackson family living room. I remember that night with a clarity so sharp it feels like the air never left it. The heat of late summer wrapped itself around our small living room, thick enough to press into the skin, but it was nothing compared to the weight of what was about to unfold. I didn't know then that I was standing at the threshold of a moment that would alter more lives than just my own. All I knew was that something inside the house felt unsettled, like the walls were holding their breath. I stood near the doorway, hands shoved into my pockets, trying to look calm, though I sensed an undercurrent of tension trickling beneath the floorboards. The Jackson family had gathered for rehearsal the way they always did. Voices, warm-ups, harmonies tested, rhythms tapped out on whatever surface happened to be closest. But that night, the energy was different. Not loud, not frantic, just loaded, as though the atmosphere itself was waiting for someone to say the wrong word, to strike the wrong note, to trigger something we could never undo. Joseph stood on one side of the room, arms crossed, eyes sharp, in that way that made everyone straighten their backs and fix their posture. But he wasn't the center of gravity tonight, not even close. Everything pulsed around the small figure standing beside Katherine. Michael, 5 years old, barely tall enough for the hem of his shirt to stay tucked in. His shoes didn't match the rhythm of the house yet. They tapped nervously, missing the beat entirely, as if fluttering to their own secret tempo. He wasn't meant to sing that night, not originally. The older brothers were rehearsing, tightening harmonies, working out transitions. It was supposed to be routine, predictable. Just another night inside a household where music flowed as naturally as conversation. But routine is fragile. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected breath to shatter it, and that breath came from Michael. I saw Katherine watching him closely, her hand hovering just above his shoulder, not touching, not guiding, just there like a promise. Her eyes held a softness, but also a private knowledge, something she had seen in him that the rest of us had only glimpsed in passing. A spark, a flicker, something not yet fully formed, something dangerous, in the sense that once discovered, it would change every single thing around it. He stepped closer to the center of the room, and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet seemed almost too loud. The sound carried a kind of suspense, usually reserved for footsteps in a dim hallway, gentle but heavy, quiet but pointed, as though each step was pulling him deeper into a place there was no returning from. I swallowed hard. "Let him try," Katherine said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room with startling precision. Everyone froze. Even the air seemed startled into silence. The older brothers exchanged glances, their eyebrows raised, their shoulders shifting with uncertainty. No one dared speak, not even to question her. Michael blinked, wide-eyed but not frightened exactly. It was something else, something I couldn't name then. A mix of curiosity and a tremor so deeply buried it barely rippled across his expression. But I felt it. I felt it the way one feels the pressure of a storm long before the clouds appear. He moved closer to the microphone stand, a hand-me-down piece of equipment that had seen more rehearsals than any of us had birthdays. The metal gleamed faintly in the dim living room light, almost like it was waiting for him. I can't explain why my pulse quickened. Nothing had happened yet. He hadn't sung, he hadn't even reached the stand, but there was a strange tension building in my chest, a sense that something monumental and irreversible hovered just beyond the moment. Then came the first shift. A documentary might later describe it as a simple scene, a young boy stepping closer to a microphone. But from where I stood, it felt like the beginning of an echo that would ripple through time. Michael's foot slipped slightly on the wooden floor, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that I saw his balance waver. His fingers curled into small fists at his sides. His breath hitched. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he would run. He looked over his shoulder, not at Joseph, not at the brothers, but straight at Katherine. She gave the smallest nod, the kind of nod a mother gives not to push, not to pressure, but to say, "You can." Yet beneath that gentle message, I sensed another layer, one that sent a slight shiver across the back of my neck. She already knew. She knew something we didn't. The room tightened around us as Michael turned back to the microphone. His shadow stretched long across the floor. It shouldn't have. The lamp in the corner wasn't that bright. But there it was, long and thin and trembling slightly, the way a string trembles before it breaks. I drew a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And then he froze. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of freeze you'd see in a stage performance. It was subtle, too subtle maybe. The kind of stillness that strikes with no warning, like a thought so heavy it stops the body cold. His eyes stared forward, not at anything in particular, but at something only he could see. A second passed, then another. A subtle tension crept along my spine, winding itself tighter, slow, deliberate, like the turning of a key inside a lock. The room, the air, the people, the whole house seemed caught in the same breathless pause. I could feel it. Something was coming, something that would shake not only this small living room in Gary, Indiana, but everything beyond it. But that moment right before the first note, held more suspense than any sound that would come after. It was the kind of silence that doesn't simply fill a room, it rewrites it. The silence that followed hung so heavy it felt alive. It crawled along the corners of the living room, seeped into the walls, pressed against my ribs like an unseen hand. No one dared move. Even the dust floating in the warm lamplight seemed suspended midair. Michael still stood motionless before the microphone, his small frame casting that long, trembling shadow that gave me an unease I couldn't explain. He looked like a child lost between two worlds, one where he could turn back, run into his mother's arms, and forget any of this ever happened, and another where the moment would swallow him whole. The tension had weight, a shape, a pulse. I caught my breath as his shoulders quivered, just barely, but enough to crack the stillness. A strange shift rippled through the room, something dark and delicate at the same time. Not dangerous, not harmful, just sharp, like walking into a memory you weren't prepared to meet. Joseph's foot tapped once against the floor, too loud, too sudden. The jolt of the sound ran through all of us like a warning. His expression was unreadable. Stern, yes, but I sensed something beneath it. Not impatience, something more complex. Calculation, perhaps. Or maybe disbelief that this tiny boy was commanding the room without uttering a word. But it was Katherine who pulled focus. She stepped slightly closer, not enough to interrupt, not enough to interfere, but enough to anchor him. Her presence softened the edges of the moment. Her voice didn't rise, but her eyes spoke with a clarity that pierced straight through the tension. "Michael," she whispered, "breathe." It should have comforted him. Instead, it fractured him. His breath broke in his throat, shallow and shaky, as though he'd forgotten how to draw air altogether. His hands unclenched, then clenched again. The flicker of uncertainty in his eyes sharpened into something more fragile. Fear, yes, but layered with something deeper. A dawning realization that every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on him, that there was no doorway wide enough to escape through now. A cold prickle crept along the back of my neck. This wasn't stage fright. It was something heavier, like standing at the edge of a cliff and not knowing if the wind behind you would push or hold you. Suddenly his lower lip trembled, a tiny, near-invisible tremor, but to me it roared. The room reacted, though no one moved. Faces tightened, breath stalled. Someone swallowed audibly, the kind of stillness that settles before a verdict. Michael's eyes darted upward, searching for something, maybe reassurance, maybe a sign, maybe an escape route carved out of thin air. His chest rose and fell too quickly. His fingers shook. The microphone loomed before him, tall and cold, a metallic tower reflecting his fear back at him. He took a step back, a small one, barely a retreat, but it was enough. My heart thudded, because that step was not just physical, it was psychological. A falter, a fracture line opening beneath his feet. I could feel him slipping, the pressure in the room built like a held storm, a kind of tension that hums beneath the skin. His brothers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to reach for him or stay frozen. Their own breaths were unsteady, pride mixed with worry, competitiveness tangled with confusion. Then Katherine knelt slightly, lowering herself to meet his eyes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're safe." But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Michael's knees bent, almost buckling, and for a heartbeat I thought he might sink to the floor. His hands flew up to his face, not fully covering it, just hovering, as though shielding himself from the room. His breathing turned uneven, jagged, the sound of a soul cornered by its own potential. The fear in him wasn't loud. It was silent, suffocating, a quiet implosion. And the thing that frightened me most? It didn't look like fear of failing. It looked like fear of being seen. The moment stretched, until the living room felt like a pressure chamber. Someone should have stepped forward. Someone should have ended it, but none of us did. We were too caught in the strange, gripping magnetism of the moment. The suspense pressed so hard against my ribs I thought they might crack. The lamp flickered, just once, a trembling pulse of light that washed the room in uneven shadows. Something inside Michael snapped. His breath hitched sharply, and his eyes glistened, not with tears exactly, but with the threat of them, shimmering like secrets about to spill. He let out a small sound, not a sob, not a word, just a broken exhale, soft but cutting, like the kind of sound you make when the world feels too big and you too small. The entire room froze, and then it happened. Michael's face twisted, not dramatically, but subtly, his composure fracturing like thin glass. His throat tightened, his shoulders pulled inward. A faint, fragile whimper escaped him, a breakdown, quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. The moment struck with the force of a revelation, a 5-year-old child trembling under the weight of a future none of us could see yet, but one that somehow he must have sensed looming over him. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't simple nerves. This was a storm gathering inside a child too young to understand its magnitude. And just as the silence reached its most unbearable point, Michael lifted his head, slowly, deliberately, with a resolve so sudden, so fierce in its quietness, it felt like watching a tide shift direction. His eyes, still shimmering, still shaken, locked onto the microphone, and though he had just broken down before us, something in his expression had changed. Something steady, something terrifyingly calm, something that made my breath catch, because I realized, in that instant, the breakdown wasn't the climax, it was the ignition. What came next would rewrite everything. The room was still reverberating with the echo of his collapse, a faint, invisible tremor lingering in the charged air. None of us spoke. None of us dared. The living room felt like the aftermath of something seismic, though nothing visible had broken. Only Michael had. Or so we thought. He had just lifted his head, slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. His breathing remained uneven, but there was a startling stillness settling inside him, the kind that forms at the center of a forming storm. His small hands, moments ago trembling uncontrollably, had gone still. A hush spread so thick it felt almost criminal, as though witnessing this transformation was something forbidden, a secret not meant to be observed. I couldn't look away. The microphone loomed before him, tall and cold, yet no longer menacing. It was waiting, no, listening. And for the first time that night, Michael didn't shrink from it. He stepped forward, just half an inch, the kind of movement no one else might have noticed, but to me it felt like the ground shifted. My pulse lurched. His shadow, previously thin and trembling, solidified on the floor beneath him, no longer fractured. The brothers, frozen in place, exchanged looks full of unspoken questions. Was this defiance? Courage? Surrender? Something else entirely? I didn't know, not yet, but I knew we were witnessing the moment before something irreversible. Katherine's hands were clasped together, knuckles faintly whitening. Her expression was controlled, almost serene, but her eyes betrayed something deeper, recognition, as if she'd seen this very transformation simmering inside him long before any of us understood the shape of it. In the corner, Joseph's posture shifted, just slightly, enough to betray a flicker of disbelief. Then Michael inhaled. The breath was small, a fragile thread of air, but it carried a sense of purpose that pulled every heartbeat in the room into its gravity. I felt the back of my tongue go dry. My fingertips twitched against my jeans. Something was about to rupture. His lips parted, but the sound didn't come immediately. Instead, for a split second, maybe less, his eyes slipped shut. Not in fear this time, in surrender or acceptance or maybe revelation. The kind of moment when a person allows the truth inside them to rise without fighting it. And then he sang, but not like any 5-year-old child should be able to sing. Not timid, not tentative, not soft, not searching, not careful. The first note left him like a blade of pure light, clean, unwavering, cutting straight through the room. It struck the space with a clarity that felt impossible, a sound that didn't match his size, his age, his trembling moments earlier. That note didn't rise. It arrived, a fully formed thing. I felt it more than heard it, a jolt in the chest, a shift behind the ribs, a shock that cracked open the tension in the room like lightning tearing through a still sky. A sound too intentional, too instinctive, too inevitable. Later, years later, people would talk about the moment Michael first sang with Jackson 5, how his voice stunned the band. But they could never know the truth unless they stood in that living room with us, unless they felt the explosion of silence as that single perfect note detonated the air. My breath froze in my throat. His brothers turned sharply toward him, eyes wide. One of them fumbled a chord on his guitar, just a tiny slip, barely a glitch, but to me it sounded like the sound of reality catching up with what had just happened. The microphone hummed, resonating with his voice, amplifying the note into something almost eerie, not spooky, just uncanny in how natural it felt for him, as though the microphone had been waiting for him specifically all this time. Michael didn't open his eyes. He stayed perfectly still, anchored by the sound rising from somewhere deep inside him, deeper than his size should have allowed, deeper than his fear could have predicted. His voice didn't just fill the room. It reshaped it, rearranged it, rewrote its very purpose. The living room walls bent inward metaphorically, tightening around him, holding that moment like a fragile relic. Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. Joseph's arms fell to his sides. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape, and still, that note held steady, not wobbly, not cracked, not childish, steady. When he finally opened his eyes, mid-note, something in them had transformed. The fear wasn't gone. It had been repurposed, sharpened into something electric. What I saw wasn't the wide-eyed panic of minutes earlier, but a haunting certainty. He wasn't singing the note. The note was singing him. His small chest expanded, voice gliding effortlessly into the next phrase and the next, as though some unseen path had unrolled beneath his feet. His hands relaxed at his sides, his shoulders lowered. His posture, just moments ago fragile, straightened with an instinctive confidence that none of us had ever seen in him before. It wasn't maturity. It wasn't talent alone. It was a kind of inevitability, like watching a star reveal the light it had always possessed, long before anyone tilted their head toward the sky to notice. The room remained in stunned paralysis. Time didn't stop. It bowed. When his note finally broke, softly, gently, gracefully, it didn't fall. It landed, a perfect landing. Silence slammed back into the room, a heavy, breathless, shaken silence. I didn't realize tears had pooled in my eyes until one slipped down, the warmth startling me back into my body. My hands shook, my lungs burned. I felt like I'd witnessed something both beautiful and unsettling, not frightening, just too big for the moment that held it. Michael stood still, chest rising and falling gently. He looked younger now, smaller, as though the power that had surged through him had retreated again, leaving him momentarily hollow, blinking, unsure of what he had just done. He turned toward Katherine. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her expression held the kind of awe that comes from recognizing destiny before everyone else. And though no one said it aloud, we all knew something irreversible had happened. We would never hear silence the same way again. The silence that followed didn't feel like absence. It felt like aftermath. A thick, trembling quietness seeped into every corner of the living room, the sort that settles only after something irreversible has occurred. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, my hands numb, as though the sound of Michael's voice had emptied me out and left only the echo behind. He was still standing there, small, fragile, breathing softly, yet the room bowed around him as if acknowledging the presence of someone much larger, the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself, but demands recognition simply by existing. The brothers stared at him, each with a different reaction carved across their faces. Awe, confusion, a flicker of uncertainty, a faint tremble of competitiveness, even a hint of fear, not of him, but of what he meant now that we had heard that voice. I felt a strange prickle run up my arms. Not discomfort, not excitement, something deeper, like understanding the beginning of a storm before the first drop of rain hits the ground. Michael broke the silence first, but not with speech. He exhaled, a tiny breath, barely a sound, but after the note that had just carved through the room, even that faint whisper seemed weighted, significant. His chest rose and fell with the effort, as though singing had pulled something out of him and left him disoriented in the aftermath. His eyes flickered up to Katherine. She didn't move, didn't approach, didn't smother him with reassurance. She just looked at him with a mixture of pride, relief, and something else I couldn't name, something ancient, as though she had just watched a prophecy fulfill itself. Joseph, on the other hand, shifted sharply, almost stepping forward, then stopping himself. His expression was tight, unreadable, calculation, shock, and beneath it all, something that made my pulse quicken. Realization. He knew. We all did. But he felt it first, felt it with the weight of a man who understood what doors had just creaked open in that cramped living room. Again, Joseph said. The word cracked through the silence like a whip. It startled Michael. His shoulders jerked slightly. The brothers stiffened. Even Katherine's eyes darkened, though she kept her composure. I felt my breath catch. Again wasn't a request. It was an acknowledgement that something powerful enough to control the room now needed to be tested, stretched, measured. Michael didn't respond. He stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed not on Joseph, but on the space between us all, as though the note he had sung was still floating there and he was afraid to disturb it. When Joseph repeated the word firmer this time, a strange crack formed in the air. Not loud, not violent, just perceptible, a shift in authority, in expectation, in destiny. Katherine stepped forward, barely half a step, but the message was unmistakable. "Let him breathe," she murmured. Her voice was soft, but it contained a quiet force, the kind that doesn't rise but resonates. The brothers lowered their instruments subconsciously. Even Joseph paused for a heartbeat. Michael's eyes finally lifted toward her. He looked lost, not frightened, not overwhelmed, just lost, like a child waking from a dream too vivid to understand. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell him something, anything, that could break the weight pressing onto his small frame, but the words stayed trapped behind my teeth, useless and clumsy. He stepped back from the microphone, just one step, but it felt like watching a tide retreat from the shore after crashing too far inland, a retraction, a pull, a gathering of breath before the next inevitable wave. No one spoke. The lamp buzzed weakly, flickering once, casting unstable shadows across the room. The living room felt smaller now, as though the walls had leaned in closer during the performance and forgotten to return to their places. But the problem, the beautiful, heavy, terrifying problem, was that none of us could see him as just a child anymore. Not after that note. Joseph moved first, stepping toward the center of the room, inspecting Michael with the kind of intensity that made my stomach tighten. He wasn't unkind, not tonight. He was just calculating, as if he saw the trajectory of something enormous, and his mind was already sprinting ahead of it. The brothers exchanged glances, their thoughts loud even in silence. Was this real? Did we imagine it? What does this mean? For him? For us? The questions collided in the air like unseen sparks. I took a step toward Michael, not fully aware of why. Maybe to comfort him, maybe to steady myself. But before I reached him, he turned toward me, and there it was, the look, a mixture of exhaustion, confusion, and a faint, lingering glimmer of something I didn't expect, relief. As though releasing that note had freed something inside him that had been caged without his understanding. Yet beneath the relief lurked a shadow, a subtle, quiet dread, as if some part of him sensed that this moment, this accidental revelation, had set into motion something far bigger than he could grasp, as if he knew instinctively that the world around him had changed, and he would never again know the safety of being unseen. Katherine stepped behind him and rested a hand gently on his shoulder. Her presence softened the edges of the room again, but only slightly, because the truth was already out. Michael had sung a note that stunned us into silence. A note that rearranged our expectations, our futures, our understanding of what a 5-year-old could possibly hold inside him. A note that carved open a doorway we could not close. And as I looked at him, this small boy standing unsteadily in the center of a living room that suddenly felt too small, I knew this wasn't the moment he became extraordinary. This was the moment we finally realized he already was. The room was dimmer than before, though no light had gone out. It was the kind of dimness that arrived only when something brighter had just burned through the air and left everyone blinking in its wake. The dust in the lamplight floated slower now, as if even it sensed the weight of what we had witnessed. Michael stood in the center of it all, a child, yes, but somehow no longer only that. His shoulders rose and fell with small breaths, each one steadier than the last, though his eyes remained distant, unfocused, as if he was still hearing something we weren't. We didn't speak, none of us. Words felt too fragile to exist in that room. I remember brushing my thumb over the edge of the piano, grounding myself in the cool wood. My legs trembled softly, the way they do when adrenaline drains from the body too quickly. I felt unsteady, off balance, overwhelmed, not because I feared what might come next, but because I sensed we had stumbled into the beginning of something monumental. Joseph was the first to break the stillness, not loudly, not harshly, just a quiet shift of his stance that thudded into the floor like a decision being made. His eyes locked onto Michael, not with anger, not even with sternness, but with a sharp, assessing intensity that made my spine stiffen. He wasn't looking at a 5-year-old anymore. He was looking at potential, raw, shocking, undeniable. But it was Katherine's reaction that carved deepest into my memory. She knelt to Michael's level, moving slowly, gracefully, as though approaching something delicate yet powerful. Her hands cupped his cheeks gently, thumbs brushing the faint warmth left there by fear, by triumph, by the unknown force that had pulled that note out of him. "You did well," she whispered. Her voice trembled, just a little, a mother's tremor, pride laced with worry, joy tangled with protectiveness. Michael blinked, the haze in his eyes softening. But instead of smiling, instead of celebrating like any child might, after being told he'd done something remarkable, he leaned into her hands with a quiet vulnerability that cracked me open. He looked tired, not physically exhausted, emotionally, as though the note he had sung hadn't just escaped him but had taken something with it. "I didn't mean to," he murmured, voice barely audible. And there, just for a heartbeat, I saw it. The fear that what he carried inside him might be too heavy for the life he knew. The brothers approached slowly from behind, their footsteps cautious, their expressions unsure. They each looked at him differently now, one with admiration, one with confusion, one with a restless flicker of envy he tried to hide, and all with the dawning awareness that nothing would ever be the same. Not for Michael, not for them, not for us. I felt my own breath catch as I stepped closer, drawn not by obligation, but by something magnetic, the need to witness, to understand, to anchor myself in the gravity of the moment. But before I could reach him, another sound split the air, a knock, a single, abrupt, hollow knock on the wooden living room door. It wasn't menacing, just ill-timed, unsettling in its coincidence, a reminder that the world outside still moved, unaware of the transformation happening within these walls. Joseph stiffened. Katherine's hands lingered on Michael's shoulders. The brothers exchanged startled looks. For a second, the moment fractured, like a bubble bursting. Joseph opened the door, murmuring something to the neighbor who'd stopped by with a question about a car part. The interruption should have broken the spell completely, but the spell didn't break. If anything, it deepened. Because while Joseph spoke through the doorway, the rest of us watched Michael, watched how he shifted his weight, how he rubbed at his eyes, how he glanced again at the microphone with a strange, conflicted expression. Fear was there, but not the same fear from earlier. This was fear braided with curiosity, the kind that forms when someone glimpses a doorway they didn't know existed and must decide whether to walk through it. When Joseph closed the door again, his gaze followed Michael with new gravity. "We need to rehearse again tomorrow," he said. A simple sentence, an ordinary sentence. But no one mistook it as such, because behind those words was an unspoken truth. Michael wasn't optional anymore. He was central. I felt the shift like a tremor beneath the floorboards, a gradual cracking open of future pathways none of us were ready for. Michael swallowed, his eyes flicking once more to the microphone. His fingers twitched, as though unsure whether to reach for it again or hide behind his mother's legs. "Are you okay?" I whispered softly, stepping closer. He looked up at me, and for the first time since the note, I saw something resembling understanding flicker across his expression. "I think," he paused, voice quivering, "I think the music knew me." A chill swept down my spine, not because the words were frightening, but because they felt truer than anything spoken that night. Katherine pulled him gently into her arms, not tightly, just enough to remind him he was still a child, still protected, still allowed to be small despite what his voice had revealed. The brothers drifted back toward their instruments, not to play, but as if instinctively orbiting around a new center of gravity. The room reorganized itself subtly around Michael, emotionally, psychologically, silently. No one declared what we all knew. No one dared say it aloud, but we felt it, each in our own chest, hearts pounding in different rhythms. A star isn't born in applause. A star is born the moment the world goes quiet, and the world, our world, had gone impossibly, undeniably silent the moment Michael sang. When we finally left the living room that night, the air still hummed with the ghost of his note. The lamp flickered again, as if bowing out after witnessing history. I paused at the doorway to look back at him one last time, small, still, unaware of the magnitude of his own shadow. But I knew in my bones that I had just watched destiny unfold inside a 5-year-old boy. And long after the night ended, its echo would follow me, follow all of us, a reminder that some moments don't fade, they resonate forever.